What strange idea worked? Because people are weird. Story 1. Captain Cook noticed one day at port that sailors debarking from Spanish vessels weren't suffering from scurvy like sailors on British ships were. He couldn't figure it out, until one day he noticed the food rations being loaded onto the Spanish ships, and saw that sauerkraut were a part of their meal plans while at sea, whereas they were completely absent from British meal plans and diets in general. How do you get someone to eat sauerkraut while at sea if it is not part of their diet? You introduce it into the officers' meals only, of course. And then you have the officers dine next to the rest of the rank and file, where everyone can see the officers eating sauerkraut, which they cannot have. From there, you wait for the rest of the sailors to ask why they can't have the new mystery food, and then you agree to compromise and allow all sailors to have sauerkraut once per week, as a reward for a diligent week's work. Story 2. Houston Airport got a lot of complaints that it took baggage too long to get to the baggage claim and people had to wait a long time. They moved the baggage claim farther away from where you get off the airplane, and even though it took just as long, because people had to walk there, they didn't complain. Story 3. Making cake mixes require more work, increased sales. Betty Crocker cake mixes weren't selling well when they were first introduced. Women felt that because they weren't doing anything other than adding water that they weren't working hard enough. The company then made it so you had to add eggs as well, and they started flying off the shelves. Story 4. Hakarl, Icelandic shark. The meat of the Greenland shark is poisonous when fresh, due to a high content of urea and trimethylamine oxide, but may be consumed after being processed. The traditional method is by gutting and beheading a Greenland or sleeper shark and placing it in a shallow hole dug in gravelly sand, with the now cleaned cavity resting on a small mound of sand. The shark is then covered with sand and gravel, and stones are placed on top of the sand in order to press the shark. In this way the fluids are pressed out of the body. The shark ferments in this fashion for 6 to 12 weeks depending on the season. Following this curing period, the shark is then cut into strips and hung to dry for several months. During this drying period, a brown crust will develop, which is removed prior to cutting the shark into small pieces and serving. Story 5. When I first started writing Android apps, I asked myself, what do people really want? Nudes is the obvious answer. But they already have lots of ways to send nudes. I'm not going to do better than any of 100 messaging apps on my own. They want to send nudes, and for there to be no trace of them to later end up on a shitty website. So I started working out an app where you could send pictures, on the basis that they could only be seen by the intended receivers. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized this just isn't a solvable problem. Sure, maybe I could override the screenshot functionality. They could still just take a picture of their phone screen with some other camera. Can't be done, I says to myself. And I forget about it. The next year, Snapchat blew up. Turns out people don't need actual security. Out of sight, out of mind is nothing. But it's enough. That had not occurred to me. Story 6. When Cadillac downsized and modernized their cars, they were shocked at the fact that the post-purchase survey respondents kept complaining about their cars' fuel efficiency. It was bewildering because the new cars got much better gas mileage than the models they replaced. Eventually they figured out what was happening, and it came down to the digital instrument panel. There wasn't anything wrong with the cars. The gauge for the 18-gallon tank would read F until a gallon was used, then read numerically 17, 16, 15. The fix was simple. They programmed the display to read F until the tank got to 16 gallons, skipping over 17, so it read F twice as long. The complaints about lousy gas mileage disappeared. Story 7. In a psychology course we were taking, we were tasked with finding a way to improve the listening ability, tested through a multiple choice test after a lecture, of little kids. What worked? Blindfolding them, and letting them doodle as they listened. The doodles? Meaningless. However, they felt like they had freedom, and the only thing of slight interest was the teacher, so our class scored on average, I think, don't quote me on this, 5% higher than the other group's classes. Story 8. Potatoes. Really, stay with me here. Kind Frederick of Prussia Antoine Augustine Parmenier wanted to introduce potatoes into his people's diet. They were easy to grow, didn't take much space, and they tasted good. His people would have none of it. Absolutely refused to have anything to do with him. Until he placed his potatoes under heavy guard. These guards had instructions to allow thieves to get away with his precious tubers. The people thought that the potatoes had to be valuable, if they were under such heavy guard, and began stealing them. And that's how you get a population of picky eaters to try something new. Story 9. The Fumblerooski play in American football. For people who don't follow the sport/people who aren't American, the Fumblerooski is a play that has been illegal in the NFL for years and was banned in the NCAA in 1992 because it is too effective. For those of you who have seen the popular 90s movie The Little Giants, the annexation of Puerto Rico is a fumblerooski. Essentially, the play works by having the quarterback intentionally place the ball on the ground. This is technically a fumble, by the center's feet after taking the handoff snap, then faking a running play in one direction. While this is happening, a guard, another offensive lineman, picks the ball up and runs in the other direction. As dumb as it sounds, the play works because it's almost impossible to read a fumblerooski as it's happening. Obstructed vision of what the quarterback does combined with quick timing of the intentional fumble means that you can't really see that he's done it. A defense would pretty much need to know it's coming to stop it. By the time the defense realizes what's happened, the ball can get pretty far downfield. Depending on how close to the end zone they were, it often results in a touchdown. Story 10. Febreze. Hear me out, because the story is kind of interesting. When Pan first marketed/tested Febreze, they couldn't get people to get excited about it. They did some in-home testing, where they gave homeowners and especially pet owners a case of Febreze. After a month or two with the product, some Pan reps visited these homeowners. In one such instance, they visited a woman who had 7 or 8 cats, and the whole house just smelled like cat piss. They sat down, trying not to pinch their noses, and asked the woman if she was using the product at all, and what she thought of it. She said, "Well, I started to use 1 bottle, but I found I really didn't need it." Stunned, the reps asked, "Have you ever thought to use it to manage the smell of your cats?" The woman, completely earnestly, replied, "I tell you, it's the strangest thing. My cats don't smell." So they realized the problem: people don't notice smells in their own homes. So, that's an example of a protect not working because people are weird. Here's how Pan made it work. Not to be defeated by silly consumers claiming they didn't need their product, Pan conducted further research. What they found was that people were much more likely to use Febreze if it was part of a routine. So they marketed it as part of a cleaning process: Febreze after vacuuming, Febreze after making the bed, etc. Needless to say, it worked. And while people, today, will use Febreze as the primary method of cleaning their home, Pan had to exploit a human weirdness in order to get people to buy it in the first place. Story 11. People in other countries are often more willing to be nicer to foreigners than to their own kind. Traveling around a small city in China last year, my friends and I were looking for a hotel willing to hold on to our luggage for us while we did some sightseeing around the city for the day. This can be hit or miss in China. Some hotels are willing to do it, some aren't. Except that day, we got turned down by about 3 or 4 hotels before we started to worry that we wouldn't be able to do much sightseeing. Being fluent in Mandarin, we suddenly thought, what if we decided to do a psychological experiment and play the role of helpless foreigner and see if things went differently? Sure enough. The next hotel we visited, walked right up to the front desk, and as soon as we started speaking English, the receptionist looked at her coworkers. "I don't know what they are saying. My English is so bad." To my surprise, they pulled out a phone, called up their off-duty manager, and handed the phone to me. She spoke English, and so I explained to her what we wanted. She immediately said, "Yes, of course we can hold on to your luggage for you. Enjoy your time sightseeing." This experience alone speaks volumes, but I've seen plenty of other stuff in my travels to suggest that locals can be downright nasty to their own countrymen sometimes, and those same people often are willing to pull out all the stops to accommodate foreign visitors. I have no idea why this is. Story 12. Wikipedia. It took a long time to become a high-quality source, but the desire of people to correct misinformation is so strong that once there was a high volume of information, the quality gradually surpassed that of traditional encyclopedias. It's amazing that it worked. Story 13. Cooking shows. It makes sense now, but when they launched, they were lambasted by everyone, because in the pre-DVR era, who would be able to follow along in real time? Of course, the whole thing makes sense now because it's more of an educational approach than an interactive one, but at the same time, it also feels like a great tease to the audience. So, you want me to pay for a show where we film you cooking food the person doesn't eat? And you talk to them via the camera how tasty it is? And you don't pause to have them follow along. And you speed up the cook and prep time so a 3-hour recipe looks like it takes 22 minutes. That sounds like a strip club for food, without the benefit of touch or smell. Story 14. Burning Man. Say what you want about it, but Burning Man is the most American thing ever. First of all, you've got a group of people who value their time above everything else, so much so that they often give up on the default world entirely forever, and end up being vagabond volunteers for various organizations for the rest of their lives. These people want to radically change their minds about all kinds of things in their lives, and interact with people who are willing to do the same, not just tag along like some spectator. Next, you've got an organized infrastructure, often made up of those same individuals that manages to establish and maintain roads, keep clean thousands of toilets, provide medical help, distribute ice, collect and send mail, coordinate zones for burning things, deal with influx and exit of road traffic, run an airport and a DMV, a police, rangers, force, monitor activity near and past the trash fence, and 100 other things I probably don't even know. Then you've got organizations not officially within the Burning Man organization, that work within to provide all sorts of entertainment, knowledge, and things to do. From big name music artists to some dude who just rocks the pan flute. There are giant dance halls and bars, crazy experimental art installations, skee-ball that's on fire, lectures and discussions, and oh so much more. All of this for a full week with no profitable motive other than the intrinsic nature of doing something you want and doing it well. Finally, it's all impermanent. Nothing stays, everything goes. It's the embodiment of the American spirit to attempt to try something to maybe have a better life, but after the burn ends, it is acknowledged that those endeavors are only permanent in our minds, in our collective memories, where we can live up to our accomplishments and own up to our mistakes, is the domain where work exists year-round as we gather our wits to decide what we want to do next year during that one specific week in the Back Rock Desert. Story 15. The 1 Million Project. A team of people put up a website barely modified from a bootstrap template and said they wanted to raise $1 million to showcase the power of the internet. They said they would release more info about their project after they reached their goal. Sure enough, they got their money and disappeared. Reddit pushed it as some glorious achievement. People are ducking stupid. Story 16. Blue Apron. It's easily as / more expensive as eating out. When you eat out you don't shop, prep, cook, or clean. But I hate planning meals. That's the least intensive part. I love digging holes, in the summer, at noon, for 16 hours straight. But I hate getting the shovel out of the shed. If only I could pay 2 times the price of a new shovel for someone to get the shovel out of the shed. Story 17. The game. It's the dumbest thing but it works. If you were aware of the game, me mentioning it just made you lose it. I also lost it by bringing it up. It only works because the brain, language and logic can be weird sometimes. People can supposedly refuse to play, but here's the thing, the way it's set up they really can't refuse. They are aware of the game, they are aware of the rules, therefore they are always playing it even if they don't want to. Some part of your brain will go off when you remember the stupid game and by acknowledging, even just subconsciously to yourself, that the game is a thing, then you lose. And start all over again. Story 18. Getting people to return shopping carts by otherwise charging them a quarter. Seriously, it is a quarter, who cares? You can't even buy a third of a candy bar for that. But I rarely ever see carts misplaced at places that charge a quarter, where I constantly see places not having that mechanism with carts everywhere. It blows my mind that apparently people are cheaper than they are lazy. Story 19. The Allies Ghost Army. An entire division that didn't really exist in a traditional sense, made of 1,100 troops who created fake radio transmissions, reports, and before D-Day made an enormous tank division out of inflatable vehicles to fool German airborne reconnaissance into thinking the Allies were massing elsewhere. Through the rest of the war they used the inflatable tanks, trucks with massive speakers and radio transmissions near the front lines. They were extremely successful and were kept a secret for 40 years after the war. Many documents pertaining to them are still classified. Story 20. When you hear that a company was hacked, you think of someone sitting at a computer going through lines of code trying to break the encryption and gain access or whatever. What often really happens is that someone will call the company and get a hold of someone and will say something like, "Hey, this is Steve at the other office. I forgot the password to the database system." And without thinking, the person who answered ignores everything they know about password security and just reads it out over the phone or sends it in a text or insecure email. The multi-billion-dollar company has their own IT department that watches over the whole company. And a lot of good it does when a local branch manager disables the Wi-Fi password because it's easier than putting it into their new phone. Story 21. Spend thousands and thousands of dollars on an ornate box to put a dead body inside of it, which will putrefy, even if embalmed, which is more money staving off the inevitable. Then spend thousands more for a plot of land to put that person inside with a marker on top that has their basic stats, name, date of birth, date of death, and then never, ever visit said place. Story 22. Have you ever looked at a menu from Chorus? Now I love breakfast food, and I mean slurp it through a tube lodged in my ass. Love breakfast food, and while I'd paid Sunset Grill many visits, my girlfriend was surprised to find that never in my life had I gone to Chorus. Here's the difference between Sunset and Chorus. Everything. Sunset Grill, as with most breakfast joints, has a set menu with every breakfast item you can think of. Sephora has every breakfast item you can think of and then some. Imagine all of your favorite shit to eat in the morning and for dessert melded into one. Now multiply that by, like, 30. I was blown the duck away. The menu starts off pretty basic, what with the eggs and the bacon, etc. Then you get to the rest and it's absolute madness. Greasy, fattening, beautiful madness, some of the strangest shit you've ever heard of. You have ice cream filled crepes with berries, topped off with honey, bacon, and a side of eggs with kiwi. The list goes on for just one item. The best part is that all of these special items are odes to customer requests that ended up being huge hits. They're named after the customers who asked for them. I mean, when in Rome, right? Story 23. My first job when I went to work for the local phone company was a payphone technician. Oftentimes I would have a trouble report on one phone in a bank of 3, usually the center one, psychology there too. We were issued these bright red stickers to put over the coin slots to indicate the phone was not working, but there were so many times I'd see those stickers with a slot pushed through them where somebody shoved a coin through the sticker to try and make a call, but I'm getting off topic here. So, after I would diagnose the issue, before going to my truck to get whatever replacement parts I needed to fix it, I would hang the phone receiver back on the hook, but upside down. That obvious visual difference was enough to keep anyone from trying to use the phone before I came back with the parts and made the repair. It looked different, not normal, so they would avoid it. Story 24. I briefly worked in the frozen department of a grocery store. There was one day where I was tired and didn't feel like organizing the Häagen-Dazs pints before I left, so I just unwrapped them and dumped them into the center freezer. Mind you, this was during sale week and Häagen-Dazs is going in quick fashion. I get my stuff, punch out, and go to get myself a few pints of ice cream, and in the 10 minutes I was gone, the Häagen-Dazs section was more organized than I left it. In an attempt to find their favorite flavor, the customers were stacking and organizing the pints themselves to separate the flavors they didn't want.